Well, hello guys. Welcome to lecture 2. This is about instruments. Now, obviously, we could talk endlessly about instruments. Anything physical around the world could be an instrument, right? So we'll probably restrict it mostly to the modern orchestral instruments plus a few friends. Okay. Traditionally, we have divided these into 5 families. Those 5 families would include the brass, the percussion, strings, woodwinds, keyboards, and then we'd have to decide what to do with electronic instruments. Traditionally, I have put them in with keyboards, and that still makes kind of sense. Although electronics is becoming so much its own thing now that might change. But for now, let's just put them in with keyboards. Okay. Um, those 5 families traditionally that I told you, brass, percussion, strings, woodwinds, and keyboards, have been around for a long, long time. And even keyboards existed before the Renaissance. And for thousands of years leading up to the Renaissance, these instruments were relatively unchanged, or I should say the ancestors of all these instruments we're going to talk about. And then we hit the Renaissance, and hey, everybody's thinking, hey, we should logic, rational thought. The idea of even science is starting to creep in there, and let's make these instruments better. And they did, and they changed. Now, when they hit the Renaissance, of course, they didn't know what to do yet to make them better. Mostly, we're looking for ways to play the more notes faster and a better tone. That's really kind of what we're after. And so they looked at human voice. Now, the traditional way to organize human voices would be soprano, alto, tenor, bass. So soprano, alto, tenor, bass, top to bottom. Soprano is high women, alto, low women, tenor is high men, and bass is low men. This is the traditional way to arrange voices. You don't have to do it this way. There are other ways. But it covers, quite a wide range from high to low. And so they thought, well, the human instrument is pretty much the same except for size. So why don't we try that with instruments? And they did this, and they came up with what is called a consort. Same design, just bigger or smaller. Probably the most common consort you would still see today would be the strings, which would include soprano, violin, alto, viola, tenor, cello, and the bass would be the bass or double bass. Okay. This worked okay for strings. Later on, it worked okay for saxophones. They didn't get them in until late 1900s or 1800s, 19th century though. But what they found out was that a lot of these designs are good in some ranges and not in others. So, with basically trial and error, they figured out that maybe consorts isn't the most efficient way to do this. So now these days, we think of them in terms of families, where the design is similar but not exactly the same. So they might have a similar sound, but they're not designed exactly the same. And that's for most of the instruments we have today. And so that's how we have traditionally organized instruments. Now electronics, that's something different, but we'll hang on to that for a while. Okay, let's start with the 5 families then. I guess first up would be strings. And I've already mentioned the royal family of the orchestra, violin, viola, cello, double bass, the strings. And guys, strings make everything sound better. Everybody loves strings. And if you want to make a song sound better, add strings, I promise. You will notice that these instruments are mostly bowed. That means they drag a wooden bow with horsehair, not regular string or anything, but horsehair. Horsehair is coarse, so when you drag it or pull it across the string of the violin or viola or whatever, it will grab that string and make it vibrate. You push or pull it, and that makes a sound. A couple advantages to that: you can have graduated dynamics. You can hold on to a tone, at least theoretically, indefinitely. And so this is great. Now, you can pluck these instruments. They're just not normally plucked this way. But these instruments, if they're plucked, is more of a special effect than normal would be bowed. Okay. There are other stringed instruments that we might want to talk about. For example, a harp, which is probably the only instrument that came from Europe. All the other instruments came from Middle East, Far East, but the harp probably came from Europe. Other instruments like guitar or lute. Now, Some sources will name the lute as the predecessor to the guitar in Europe, and I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but there's another instrument from Spain before this time called the chitara, which sounds more like guitar. It looks more like a guitar. Well, okay, whatever. We'll accept lute as a predecessor, but nevertheless, there's quite a bit of difference between a lute and a guitar. And just keep in mind that a chitara might be something closer in terms of evolution. Okay, these instruments, of course, are mostly plucked. Okay, we have a few plucked other instruments like auto harp or something like that. Zither, you might know it, and a couple other instruments. But otherwise, the one we'll talk about the most probably would be harp, other than the royal family of strings. Second family, woodwinds. This would include flute, clarinet, saxophone, but it would also include the recorder. Probably a lot of you recognize recorders from having played them in grade school or something. They're cheap instruments that you can make. They make them out of plastic these days, although they were made out of wood before. And basically the recorder precedes the flute for the most part. And then we move into flutes, although they were wooden flutes clear up until the 20th century mostly. And then clarinets, which is what we call the single reed. There is a mouthpiece with a piece of bamboo strapped to it, and you leave a little gap in it, and then you blow through it, and it makes a vibration. This is how we create the sound. With a flute, you blow it over the top. With a recorder, it's like a police whistle. You've got a hole you blow into. There's a hole here with a gash in it, and then however long or short the vibrating air column is, this is your pitch. This is a concept that we will hang on to for woodwinds, brass, organ, you name it, because you can have a vibrating air column. So with strings, what's vibrating? The strings make the pitch. What's vibrating in a clarinet or a recorder? It's the air column itself is vibrating and giving us a particular pitch. And that's why we have the holes in the instruments to lengthen or shorten that vibrating air column. Okay. And then we also have double reeds. Oh, wait a minute. Did I leave out saxophone? Yeah, saxophone came a little later, not till the later 1800s, late 19th century. And but that is also a single reed. Looks very much like a clarinet, and it's mostly made out of brass. We don't call it a brass instrument, though. If it helps, we still use a bamboo reed to play it. So if that helps you think of it as a woodwind, then okay. Double reeds. This would include oboe, English horn, which is neither English nor a horn, and bassoon. There are such things as contrabass bassoons, for example, really low. In fact, they don't use them all the time, most of the time, in fact, but when they do use them, it's probably the lowest instrument in the orchestra. Instead of having a mouthpiece, you take that piece of cane, you cut it in half, you strap them to each other, but still leave a hole in it so you can blow in it, and they vibrate. And you wind up with a vibrating vibration that causes the pitch or the tone. But like the other instruments, we have buttons and holes to make longer or shorter vibrating air columns, and that gives us the pitch. Okay. And then let's see. The next family would be brass. Same concept here. Basically, in a brass instrument, we have three parts. We have the cup-shaped metal cup-shaped mouthpiece that you blow into by vibrating your lips. This creates a vibration. That's part one. Part two is the tubing where the vibrations go into. And then part three is the bell where it expands out to project it to wherever you're sending it. And they are typically made out of brass. Okay. These instruments would include today mostly trumpets, trombones, which would be mostly the slide trombone. Okay, now there are valve trombones that aren't used too often, but most people would tend to use the slide trombone. Okay, and then there's the French horn, tuba, and euphonium, which some people might call a baritone. Now, you're at the water cooler at work, and you got Bob, the water cooler snob, and you thought, he likes music, so you're going to go up and press him. And you say, hey, Bob, you should have seen those tubas during the halftime show of the football game. They had smiley faces on their bells, and they were bopping. And Bob looks at you, and he goes, tubas. Oh, you mean sousaphones? Yeah, okay. What's the difference between a tuba and a sousaphone? Well, sousaphone, as in John Philip Sousa, the da 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 da. Yeah, that Sousa. He wanted carrying a concert tuba is hard because you have to hold it. So what he did is they modified the design a little bit, made a little bar you can rest on your shoulder, so you take most of the weight on your shoulder, and then you have the bell up and pointing forward, so that you can aim your sound. Okay, and this works out really well. And now you can march with a tuba. Otherwise, they play in the same range, they sound the same. What's the difference? Not much. In fact, they sound so much the same that's like some high schools and stuff, when they have to buy tubas, they'll buy sousaphones and use them in the concert band, and then they can double up in the marching band and the concert band, even though technically it probably wouldn't sound as exactly like we would want, but that's all right. Otherwise they sound pretty much the same. In the brass family, the biggest difference between these different instruments, besides size, is the design of the bore. This is the tubing we're talking about now. So after your lips start vibrating, you blow into the mouthpiece, you hit the tubing. The tubing will do one of two things. It'll either start to gradually get larger as it follows the tubing around until it hits the bell, or it will hit that tubing and stay pretty much the same until it hits the bell and goes out. When it stays the same, we call this a cylindrical bore. When it's gradually getting larger, we call that a conical bore. And it changes the sound. A conical bore is more mellow. So a conical bore would include tuba, euphonium, French horn. Okay. What would be a cylindrical bore? Trumpets and trombones. Okay. And the result is, with a cylindrical bore, is the sound is much more present, much more in your face, bah, as opposed to a tuba, right? And so the conical bore tends to mellow out the tone. So this is one way that we can affect the sound a little bit. But nevertheless, all these instruments in the brass family blend with each other very well because of the similarity in how they make the sound. The next family would be the percussion. This gets kind of fuzzy, kind of gray area, but we have basically organized percussion, into two types, pitched or unpitched. Now, like I said, anything that you can beat on is percussion, right? And the truth of the matter is that in the West, the only percussion instrument that was used with any regularity was the timpani, up until about the 20th century, really. Then after the 20th century, of course, everything's in there, including the kitchen sink. But of course, these days we have a much larger standard set for percussion, and that would include almost any kind of drums, tambourine, cymbals. Now, unpitched drums are generally considered unpitched, except for one specific type of drum, the timpani, sometimes called kettle drums. And that is because of the way they're designed. You can actually tune those, and they have little pedals that you can use to tune them. And so we actually write pitches for the kettle drums or the timpani. But most drums are considered unpitched. Now, the reason this gets fuzzy is because you say, hey, I went to this rock concert, and the drummer, I could hear the pitches, digga-digga-digga-digga-digga-digga-doo. Well, yeah, but generally speaking, what happens is we hear pitch ranges, but we don't hear specific pitches, okay? Having said that, is it possible to tune drums? Yes, but it's really hard to do, and unless you're playing timpani. Now, in which case, timpani, it's still hard, but you can do it much easier with the timpani than other drums, okay? But generally speaking, it's just for simplicity's sake, we consider them unpitched. Other unpitched would be cymbals, castanets, pitched instruments, percussion, marimba, xylophone, chimes. These would all be typical pitched. And you will notice, you can usually tell that they're pitched. And then, of course, that does include timpani as well. Okay, that's considered a pitch percussion instrument. Most of them, not the timpani, but the other ones you'll notice are arranged in the same arrangement you see on a piano keyboard. If you look at the black notes, it's the pattern of two black notes, 3 black notes, 2, 3 black notes, 3 black notes, 2, 3, 2, 3. And these other pitched percussion instruments, most of them will have that same arrangement. And so you can assume that they're probably pitched. Are they the same pitches you find in the piano? Yeah, they are. Okay. Okay, so that's percussion. What do we use? We can use our hands to play percussion. We can use sticks. We can use mallets, which is nothing more than a stick with stuff on it. That stuff can vary. It can be yarn, it can be rubber, hard rubber, soft rubber, it can be plastic, it can be steel. Or you can actually have a hammer, okay, which most of the time they're wooden hammers, sometimes plastic hammers, used for like the chimes and things like that. So all these things can be used to strike percussion, and a percussionist will have a bag full of sticks and mallets and hammers, and it's all wrapped up and looks kind of like a chef's bag, really. But okay. And let's see, what have we left out here? Okay, the next family that we would talk about is keyboards. Keyboards have been around longer than you realize. Now, not exactly like we use them today, okay, but nevertheless, the keyboard has been around. In fact, there are schematics that show for building an organ that date back to the Roman Empire, believe it or not. So yeah, the organ's been around a very long time. The other keyboards we'll talk about would be piano, of course, which was not invented until 1709. And that's actually in the Baroque, but didn't get used until the classical period, 1780s-ish, because when they first built it, it was a piece of junk. But once they did start using it, 1780s or so, that's Mozart and Haydn, it became the king of the keyboards until probably the 21st century. And now the electronic keyboard has probably displaced it, I suppose. And then the organ. Now we're talking about a pipe organ, okay? If you go into a church or a concert hall and you look at a pipe organ, you see all these giant pipes, and that's, of course, this is something you need to understand. Why have such huge pipes? Okay, it's not just because they're bigger or louder, but a specific pitch has a specific length. Okay, that is a physical fact. So a low B flat, the big pipe organs will have like a 32-foot pipe on there. Okay, actually I think that's a C. So that low C on the is actually, the wavelength is actually 32 feet. Okay, in some cases you could, I guess there's a couple organs that have 64 foot. Anyway, the point is that's actually how long the wavelength is. And so you have to have all these thousands of pipes in some cases of different lengths and sizes, because you have to have a specific length for a specific pitch. In addition to that, the pipes are shaped differently, like we were talking about with the brass. So some of them are straight up and down, some are flared out, some go up and flare in. This all changes the timbre. And so with an organ, you can pull some buttons which are called stops, and you select a certain timbre you can play, and you can get various sounds even for the same pitch. So yeah, you can see already there's a lot of moving parts in a pipe organ, and that makes them very expensive to build, expensive to maintain, but they're cool, okay, and they can rock your socks off. And then we have synthesizers, or shall we just say electronic instruments. Not every electronic instrument has a keyboard, but for convenience sake, I guess I'll still go ahead and put them in the keyboard family, because, even a computer has a keyboard, right? But nevertheless, electronic instruments are becoming more and more dominant, although 98% of the time when you hear electronic instruments, they're actually just imitating acoustic instruments, because turns out we like acoustic sounds better than electric sounds, and that's just how we evolved. Our survival depends on acoustic sounds and not electronic sounds. So we can make some really interesting sounds with electronics, but we do fatigue very quickly with electronic sounds. And so that's why we don't have just pure electronic music playing like they thought was going to happen when they first came out with electronic instruments. What else here? Okay, so that's the 5 families, and we've thrown in electronics with, oh, wait a minute. On the keyboards, I did forget to put in one keyboard, and it's not really terribly important. That's why I forget it. The clavichord. You won't hear me talk about it much in this class because it wasn't particularly influential. It's a very small instrument. You could sit it in your lap, but it was not very loud. And so you could only play it it was meant to be played in the living room with maybe 3-4 people at most. Okay. So it wasn't very helpful. Now, a harpsichord is much bigger, louder than a clavichord, although not that loud, really. And by the name of a harpsichord, where'd it come from? Well, they created the harpsichord to try to make a way to play a harp louder, essentially. It's a little louder, not much, but a little. And you can use a lot of fingers with using the keyboards and stuff like that. And then, of course, the piano, which is different. It doesn't pluck the strings. A harpsichord will pluck the strings like a guitar, ding. But a piano strikes the strings like a hammer, bam. So when you push one of those keys, the hammer comes up, that felt hammer comes up, hits the string, boom, and that's how it starts the vibration. Okay. Okay. When you have all these instruments, we'll talk about the orchestra. The orchestra, you need to understand, is an acoustic ensemble that evolved over time. And so we place instruments traditionally because of in order of how loud they are. So we in the front you have the strings because they're the quietest instruments of the orchestra. So that's violins, violas, cellos, double bass. Okay, and they would be all along the front as far forward as we can get them, pretty much. And then behind them in the middle would be woodwinds. Behind in the far right corner would probably, most often anyway, be the brass. In the far left corner, you'd have the percussion. And you never put percussion and brass together because you would never hear anybody if you let those two groups get together. And then keyboards. We have, it depends on which keyboard. Piano, unless they're soloists, any soloist will be down front, okay? But so it doesn't matter what instrument would be, soloists will be down front so we can hear them. If it's just part of the ensemble, though, piano will be back in front of the percussion. Organ, of course, the pipes are all against the back wall, but the console for the organ will be against the back wall, probably. And then if it's a harpsichord, because it's not very loud, it'll be down center front as far as we can get it. Sorry, guys. And that's because a harpsichord is just not very loud, but he would be as far down as we can get, except he'll still be in front of the conductor. Okay. We do have some traditional, this is the traditional arrangement. There are other ways to arrange an orchestra, but this is what we use most often because it tends to balance most. The one instrument that is the hardest to figure out where to place is the harp. The harp it's a big instrument, but it's not a very loud instrument. And so if you put it up front, nobody can see. If you put it in the back, nobody can hear it. So where do we put it? Well, we put it in front of the piano, usually on the left side. It could be on the right side. But, the problem is you have trouble hearing it sometimes. So there have been some experiments with harps and harpsichords in trying to amplify them with, some results good, some results not so good. But nevertheless, it's kind of hard to decide what to do with, particularly the harp, because it's too big to put in front. Okay. We have some traditional ensembles you should be aware of. String quartet, which consists of 2 violins, viola and cello. No double basses, because in the beginning the double bass was not a very good instrument, and they didn't want to use it. So they used those 4 instruments, plus those 4 instruments, violins, viola, cello, are all very easily soloist instruments. Basses, not as easily. Okay, and so, of course, Haydn is the guy that standardized the string quartet. He didn't invent it, but he standardized it, okay? And then we have things like Woodwind Quintet 5, so which has 2 trumpets, same principle, right? So 2 trumpets, just like in the string quartet, we had 2 violins. So in brass quintet, we have 2 trumpets, French horn, trombone, and either a tuba or a bass trombone. Now, bass trombone plays in the same range as a tuba, so why would you play one over the other? Remember, they're different bore. A tuba has a conical bore. Trombone has a cylindrical bore. So it depends on what you want from your bass line. If you want that bass line to kind of stand out a little bit, you probably give it to a trombone. But if you're looking for more blend, you give it to a tuba. Okay. And then woodwind. Oh, I said woodwind. That was a brass quintet. Sorry. And then a woodwind quintet, of course. Here's an interesting thing. In a woodwind quintet, one of the 5 instruments is going to be a French horn. Now, the French horn, believe it or not, is an honorary member of the woodwind family. Okay, it's because they found out basically through trial and error that French horn makes woodwinds sound better. Woodwinds have a hard time blending, and so if you want woodwinds to blend, they found out put a French horn in there. It's like magic. So inevitably, when you see woodwinds playing in an orchestral score, you're going to have French horns in there playing too. Okay, so the French horn is an honorary member of the woodwind family. What else have we left out? Okay, yeah, here's a couple of that are a little tricky. We have piano trio. Now, it's not three pianos, although, in the 20th century you could probably find it. But what this traditionally means is a piano plus violin and cello. Okay? And the same goes with a piano quintet. Not five pianos, although I'm sure you could find a piece somewhere for five pianos. But it means a piano with a string quartet. So a piano, two violins, viola, cello. Okay. All right. The only thing left to say about this is, in terms of how we describe things, one instrument playing by itself is a solo. Okay, that makes sense. If we have several parts playing at the same time, but each part is independent with only one player on each part, that is by definition a chamber ensemble. Okay. And if it has two or more instruments playing on a part, that is by definition orchestral. If you go see an orchestra play, you'll probably see maybe 16 first violins all playing the same line. Okay. And that's because it's orchestral in nature. Otherwise, a couple of things. Voices tend to be choirs, instruments tend to be orchestras, but you say, hey, wait a minute. I saw a group say that they were a clarinet choir or a trombone choir. What they're trying to say is they're so sonorous, they're as beautiful as a bunch of voices. The gold standard for expression and beauty, guys, the voice, the human voice. Okay. So, but traditionally, you're not going to go see the Las Vegas Philharmonic Choir. You're going to go see the Las Vegas Philharmonic Orchestra. And they might have a choir with them, but they'll list them separately. Otherwise, guys, that's a very fast blow through of the instruments, and we'll talk to you again a little later.